It began with silence. Samuel Ward, a federal investigator, vanished while digging into a dangerous counterfeit ring. His brother Ethan, a drifter with a soldier's instincts, had no reason to return to Rust Creek until a torn ID badge surfaced at the edge of an abandoned rail yard. The badge carried Samuel's name. Inside the depot's shuttered corridors, Ethan found doors sealed with faded evidence tape, a hidden office no one had bothered to reopen, a bloodied glove, a strongbox chained shut. Shadows of a conspiracy whispered through shredded files. Each step dragged Ethan deeper into the life Samuel had died trying to expose. And when a missing laptop surfaced in a pawn shop, its encrypted files pointed to one man, Victor Harlan, a respected businessman whose empire thrived on secrets. Ethan knew the system would look away, but he would not, and what he uncovered could no longer stay hidden.
Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily crime cases we uncover. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update.
It began with silence, not the kind you find in a quiet room or the pause between words. This was the kind of silence that feels deliberate, heavy, and wrong. My brother Samuel was not answering his phone. That alone was unusual. He had a habit of calling me even if we lived very different lives. But then days passed and the silence grew into something else, something I could not ignore. Samuel was older than me, always the one who followed rules, who believed in structure. He worked as a federal investigator, the kind of man who thought the law could handle anything if you just pushed hard enough. I left the law behind years ago. I left the uniform too. Life taught me that rules break easier than people think. But Samuel, he clung to them. He believed in them. That belief may have cost him his life. I returned to Rust Creek with nothing more than a bag on my shoulder and a bad feeling in my gut. The town was smaller than I remembered. Some places looked abandoned, others unchanged since childhood. But people were different. They avoided my eyes when I asked about Samuel. They looked past me as if I was not there. And when people pretend not to see you, it usually means they know more than they want to admit. I started with what Samuel left behind. His office was cold, papers cleared away like he had never been there at all. The desk drawers were empty, the bulletin board bare. His car, still parked where it should not have been, told a different story. Inside the glove compartment, I found a receipt dated 2 nights before he vanished. Rust Creek Rail Yard, a place long since shut down, no reason for anyone to go, unless they had something to hide. The rail yard sat on the edge of town, rust eating through steel, windows shattered, grass pushing through cracked pavement. I knew the place from when I was young, when trains still ran through here. Now it looked like a skeleton. The kind of place where voices echo but never return. I walked the perimeter, slow, deliberate, my boots crunching on gravel. That was when I saw it, caught in the chain-link fence, half buried under weeds. Samuel's torn ID badge. The plastic was scratched, the lanyard frayed, as if ripped from his neck in a struggle. His photograph stared up at me, color faded but name clear. I held it in my hand for a long time, the metal edges biting into my palm. That badge was not dropped by accident. My brother had been here, and if his badge was here, then so was trouble. I stood by the fence, the weight of it heavy in my chest. Samuel had been close to something, close enough that someone wanted him gone. I knew that much already. What I did not know was who, or why. But I knew this. You do not leave evidence in plain sight unless you think no one will come looking. They underestimated me. I pushed through a gap in the fence, stepping into the yard. The air inside was colder, stiller. Buildings rose like tombstones, glass missing from their frames, doors chained shut but rusting. I walked slow, careful, scanning everything. A set of faded tire tracks led across the dirt, recent enough to stand out against the dust. Someone had been here not long ago. That told me the place was not as empty as it looked. I kept moving, my eyes catching the small details. A crushed cigarette near the loading dock. Footprints pressed into dried mud, too fresh to belong to the past. The rail yard was abandoned but not forgotten. People came here, did things here, things they wanted hidden, and Samuel had come to uncover it. He always followed the trail, no matter where it led. Now I was following his. My mind went back to the silence, the unanswered calls, the neighbors who looked away. Rust Creek was not just ignoring what happened, they were afraid. Afraid of what Samuel had uncovered, afraid of who was behind it. Fear is a language of its own, and I had learned to read it. It told me that I was not looking for a man who had simply gone missing. I was looking for a man who had been taken out of the way. The sun slipped behind clouds, shadows stretching long across the tracks. I stopped at the entrance to the main depot building, its steel doors chained but bent. The paint was peeling, rust blooming in patches. Faded letters still marked the wall, barely readable. I reached out, pressing my hand against the cool metal. This was where it began. I unclipped the chain and pushed the door open. The hinges screamed, echoing through the hollow space inside. The air that met me was thick with dust, the smell of oil and rot clinging to every surface. My boots touched down on concrete, sound bouncing off the walls. Empty, silent, but not dead. Somewhere inside that depot lay the answer to Samuel's disappearance. Somewhere in there, silence had swallowed him whole. I stepped into the darkness, the light from outside cutting a narrow path behind me, and that was when I knew the hunt had already begun. The depot swallowed the light behind me and turned it into a thin blade that barely reached my boots. The air held the dry taste of dust and machine oil. I let my eyes adjust to the murk and listened. Buildings this old make their own weather. Metal pops, sheetrock sighs, but there was another layer under the natural noises, the sense of something interrupted and left unfinished. I followed that feeling along the cracked concrete. Rows of empty desks leaned against one wall, metal legs buckled by rust and heat. A bulletin board with sunburned cork remained bolted in place. A few thumbtacks still clung there like tiny anchors holding nothing. I traced the line of the floor where dirt had collected in drifts. There were trails cut through those drifts. Narrow paths where boots had brushed by. Some trails were old and shallow. One was sharper and darker. I knelt and pressed 2 fingers into the edge of the print. The dust clumped and held shape. That told me the last visit had not been 2 months ago. It had been recent, maybe days. The tread pattern was common, but the spacing said a tall man with a long stride. He had not paused much. He had moved with intent. I rose and followed the path past a row of doors with cloudy glass panes. The glass had been painted from the inside long ago, an office trick to block eyes without paying for curtains. Paint flakes stuck to the floor like scales. I ran my hand over one panel and took a little of the paint on my skin. The layer beneath was cleaner. Someone had brushed past and wiped a streak through the grime. The smear formed a curve near the handle. A hand had reached here and pushed. At the end of the corridor, a door stood out only because it tried not to. Plain steel. No signage. No glass. The jamb had been painted but carried fresh scratches at shoulder height. I stepped close and saw 3 shallow arcs in the metal where a tool had slipped. The lock set itself was new. Brushed nickel instead of the old brass used everywhere else. A new lock on an old door tells a simple story. Someone had a reason to keep this place closed. I leaned near and smelled the edge where door met frame. Oil and something with copper in it, faint and old. I checked the floor again. Dust piled up in the corners, but a small patch near the threshold looked disturbed. The marks were shallow and careful. A door opened and closed without haste. Someone had a key. I traced the seam of the frame with 2 fingers and felt a thin ridge of adhesive near eye level. I peeled a flake free. It caught the light. Evidence tape once sealed this door. The tape residue mattered. It meant officials had been here once and had left a boundary. The boundary had been ignored and replaced by a new lock. That is a message. Case marked. Case closed. Case reopened by someone who did not sign the log. I looked for a camera and found one dead eye tucked into the corner. The lens was blind with dust. Wires dangled. No power. No record. Whoever came last did not want to be seen by a system and did not expect anyone to ask. I circled back to the main hall and walked the perimeter in slow loops, building a mental map. The rail yard had been designed to move weight from one point to another with the least friction. Even abandoned, it still guided you. Cranes hung above like skeleton arms. Yellow lines on the floor had faded but still drew lanes to the loading bays. I found the dock where delivery trucks would have backed in. Dark rubber marks ground into the concrete. The marks overlapped older patterns, fresh over ghost. A stack of pallets had been pushed into a crude barricade near a side door. I pulled two aside and caught a smell that did not belong to dust or oil. A sharp tang that stings the soft tissue at the top of the nose. Cleaning agents, industrial grade. People use strong cleaners when they want to erase what happened. They rarely get everything. I ran a light across the floor at a low angle. The beam picked up faint swirls where mops had chased stains toward a drain. There was grit in the grooves and tiny fibers caught at the edges. I crouched and lifted one with a fingernail. It gleamed under the light. Synthetic, not from a mop. From gloves, most likely. Someone had cleaned this area in a hurry with poor technique and left a trace of the thing they used to protect themselves. That was something I could work with later. For now, I followed the curve of the dock to a short stairwell that dropped into a service corridor. The corridor ran cold and narrow. Pipes lined the ceiling and sent slow drips to the floor. A low hum came from somewhere deep in the building. It was the sound of a compressor slowly dying or a fridge down the hall with a stubborn motor. I passed 3 doors on the left. All were ajar and all opened on rooms that held nothing but fallen ceiling tiles and dead light fixtures. The 4th door on the right was shut and carried the same brushed nickel lock I had seen before. I tested the handle. It did not move. I placed my ear to the seam and listened for currents of air. There was a faint movement that came and went like a breath, space beyond the door. Maybe a larger room holding heat differently than the corridor. I checked the jamb for adhesive. Same sticky ridge under my fingertips. Another door once sealed with tape. Another lock installed later. 2 doors in the same building upgraded by the same hand. Patterns matter. I kept moving until the corridor fed me back into the main depot from a different angle. I stood still and let the space talk. Somewhere a bird flapped in the rafters. Somewhere a drop hit metal like a slow clock. I pictured Samuel walking this same path. He would have moved faster, chasing time instead of letting time settle around him. He would have called someone to say he was close. He would have believed that showing up with the right badge was enough. I did not believe that anymore. I believed in pressure and patience, and the things people do when they think no one will look twice. I swung the beam of light across a row of cabinets bolted to a wall. The handles were pitted with rust except for one that gleamed in a small half-moon pattern. A thumb had cleaned it by accident. I tugged the door and it stuck hard. I wedged my shoulder and forced it open. Inside was only air and a single nail driven through the back panel to hold a key ring. There were no keys left. Only the outline where 2 had hung for a long time. The wood around each outline had darkened. A careful removal leaves a shape behind. Someone took keys from this cabinet and did not bother to hide that they had existed. That suggested comfort. This was home turf for someone still moving through these halls. I took a slow breath and let it out. Then I went to work tracing the places where that person would walk to avoid creaking boards and noisy debris. My circles got tighter as the map in my head filled. I returned to the first steel door with the newer lock. The painted plaster to the right of the frame had a hairline crack with a tiny wedge missing near the baseboard. I slid a blade into the gap and pried gently. A sliver came free with a crisp sound. Behind the sliver was a void in the wall, no bigger than a wallet, empty now. It might have held a card, maybe a spare key, a small convenience for someone who needed quick access without a record. That confirmed what the residue already told me. This door had been sealed and later adopted by another authority, not the kind that wears uniforms. The kind you cannot find in a directory. I set my pack on the floor and pulled a narrow pry bar from inside. The bar had scars from other doors and other days. I weighed the frame with my eyes and picked the hinge side as the weak point. New locks often ignore old hinges. Force the right edge and you will find the soft spot. I placed the claw between frame and door just below the middle hinge and leaned in a slow arc. No jerk, no sound yet. The metal complained anyway, a soft groan that echoed into the hall. I paused and listened for footsteps. The building gave me nothing new. I shifted higher and tried again. The groan turned into a stutter and then a pop as the screws let go of dead wood. A pale line appeared along the seam and the smell inside grew stronger. The smell was stale air and something left behind and shut away. The kind of smell that belongs to paper and old cloth and the trace memory of a chemical spill. I widened the gap and felt cool air slide out like a held breath. Dust rolled into the beam in lazy spirals. My shoulders pressed the bar and the frame complained louder. The new lock still held tight. The hinges yielded one by one like tired teeth letting go. I stopped with the opening wide enough to slide my hand through. My fingers found the inner bolt and the cold face of the latch. I worked them blind and lifted, then rolled my wrist until the tongue drew back. The door jerked and settled. The crack widened. The light behind me cut across the dark interior and struck something that threw it back. A hard surface. Smooth. Out of place in a room that should have nothing but dust and broken furniture. I tightened my grip on the bar and took one step forward into the frame. The beam traced the floor and lifted slowly until it reached the reflection again. It shimmered in a thin line, bright and flat. Not glass. Not metal. Something else entirely. The light painted a narrow stripe across an object I could not yet see whole. And then I pushed the door the rest of the way and the stripe slid across the room like a blade, and what it revealed stopped my breath at the threshold. I did not step across that threshold. Discipline saved cases more often than courage, and that room could wait for measured steps. I marked the bent hinge with a grease pencil from my pack. I slid the door back into place until the new lock kissed the frame. The thin blade of light vanished and the depot swallowed its secret again. The residue of evidence tape on the jamb stayed under my thumb a moment longer. It felt like a broken promise. Someone had declared this room preserved and then quietly reversed the decision. I logged the detail, then backed through the corridor the same way I entered. My footprints matched my earlier path, heel into toe. No new noise. No new light. Rust Creek would not offer cameras, but it would offer eyes accustomed to watching in silence. Places like this breed routine in the people who work them. Routines keep memories in neat rows. Find the person who locked gates, reset breakers, and signed delivery logs. Find the person paid to notice when things are out of place. I left the depot, circled the fence line, and followed the service road to the residential block that housed the night shift long ago. The apartments had sun-faded curtains and quiet stoops. Old nameplates held newer stickers, layered until the edges curled like bark. I checked mailboxes for handwriting styles, then looked for the door with a freshly swept step and a straight line of footprints from street to threshold. Care lives in those details. I found the unit with a square of rubber under the mat to keep it from skating on concrete. The mat had caught a small curl of blue thread, the kind used on uniforms. The man inside carried years in his shoulders and grease in the lines of his hands. He had a habit of standing back from the doorway, not out of fear but so he could see more. I introduced myself without a badge and without a story, just a name and a purpose. I told him I was Samuel's brother, and that I was looking for the last person who saw Samuel at the yard. His mouth tightened at my brother's name, not in surprise but in recognition. He worked nights until the yard went dark and then kept the keys for a private security outfit that patrolled what remained. He said trouble mostly came from teenagers and copper thieves, but recently the trouble changed shape. Expensive cars arrived with their lights cut. Men wore the wrong shoes for work and the right shoes for leaving marks. He had seen my brother at the fence 3 nights before the silence began. Samuel had spoken to him the way professionals do when they expect cooperation and do not threaten it. He remembered a second night too. He said Samuel returned with a question about a side entrance and a door with fresh scratches. He said Samuel asked whether anyone still used the loading dock after hours. The guard told him about faint engine noise and the sound of pallets shifting when no one was scheduled. He also told him about a light that flickered in the north office even after he shut the building down from the breaker room. He found that detail interesting, and I did too. He said the last night was the worst. He told me he was halfway through a cigarette at the far gate when 2 men arrived on foot and crossed the yard without looking around. He noticed they did not check for cameras or worry about the angle of the moon. They moved like they had been here many times. He tried to wave them off. They ignored him and went straight toward the main depot where the steel doors showed paint flaking like rusted scales. He watched my brother step out from the shadow of a crane and raise a hand. He said Samuel's posture was calm, a calm that came from certainty. He described the men as taller than Samuel by a margin and wearing jackets heavy enough to hide shapes. He could not see faces from his distance, but he could see the way shoulders spoke. One man held his arms close like a swimmer protecting ribs. The other walked with one foot slightly out, a habit men pick up after old injuries. He could not hear everything. The yard eats sound and throws it against iron. But he noticed rhythm. Samuel spoke in measured phrases, the way a man speaks when he wants the words to carry into a recorder without changing tone. The taller of the two shifted his weight, then stepped forward until he occupied Samuel's space. The guard said he stubbed his cigarette and started walking, not because he thought he could stop them, but because he could not watch from far away and still respect himself. Before he reached them, the men turned their backs and started for the far door. The door with the brushed nickel lock that should not have existed. Samuel followed, not fast, but close enough to matter. The guard said the three disappeared into the depot and that the lights on the north side stuttered for a moment and then steadied. He stood at the threshold and felt the old building breathe out. He waited for a call that never came and a siren that never sang. He told me he did what men without badges do when they understand the limits of their job. He locked the gate behind him and walked a slow circuit, stopping twice to listen. He heard the clatter of metal once, then silence. When he reached the north hall again, the light was steady and the door was shut. He felt the seam of the jamb and found a ridge of torn adhesive under his nail. He recognized evidence tape without needing the letters. He also recognized the absence of it when he returned in the morning and saw the residue filed flat by a pass of sandpaper. He went to his supervisor and tried to put the detail in a report. The supervisor told him the yard was off their books and not to invite liability. The instructions sounded practiced, like a line read aloud many times. He said that was the day he decided to keep his eyes pointed down. He lasted one more shift, then turned in his radio and the keys he still controlled. He looked at me then and said the part that made his shoulders heavy. He heard one of the men call the other by a name, not a full name, but enough. He heard Harlan like a dropped handle, hard and quick. He did not know the man, but he knew the companies that rented warehousing from the county. He kept a folded page from an old directory in his wallet because he no longer trusted computers to keep old things. He laid the paper on the table between us with fingers that shook more from anger than age. The paper held a list of tenants, contractors, and their designated access routes for deliveries when the yard still processed overflow. Near the bottom was a block of text with a company name I already knew, Harlan Freight and Mineral Storage. The listing included an authorization code and a contact name we did not need now. Patterns have a way of repeating themselves in cities and in men. I felt the rhythm settle into place like a train finding track. He told me he did not go back to the depot after that night. He said he did not want his blood to share a room with the silence that ran the place. He said he remembered Samuel's face in the half-light between the doors. He said he also remembered the way the men's steps changed after they passed him, from casual to deliberate. He thought that detail mattered because it meant the conversation had shifted from talk to purpose. I asked him to walk me through his usual circuit again, using the floor plan in his head. He closed his eyes and pointed his finger across the table as if drawing lines in dust. He marked the route from gatehouse to breaker room to North Hall to the row of offices where old glass panels gathered grime. He stopped above the square that represented the room with the fresh lock and the shaved jamb. He mentioned a small maintenance closet wedged opposite that room, never used because the hinges squealed. He said the closet held nothing but a bucket, a length of hose, and a clipped stack of tags used to mark repairs. He also remembered a metal plate in the back wall, shin-high and painted the color of neglect. He had tried to pry it once with a flathead as a young man and found it stubborn. He had not tried again. He laughed without humor and said men who clean buildings learn the bodies of those buildings better than anyone else and then go home and forget them on purpose. I told him I would not forget. I told him I needed one more thing to complete the picture that kept forming behind my eyes. He went to a drawer and returned with a small ring of keys he had not declared when he resigned. He said the keys were not to anything essential, just to keep habits from dying slowly. The ring held tags worn soft at the edges. One tag bore a number that matched the office row. Another tag had snapped in half and was held together with electrical tape. He hesitated and then placed the ring in my palm like an act of contrition. He said he was tired of being useful only in silence. He said his nights had gotten longer since he turned his eyes away and that he wanted them shorter again. I told him usefulness returned when a person chose it. He nodded and stared at the table as if it could offer absolution. He could not give me more, but what he had given was enough to reset the board. I left him with a promise that did not require words. At the stairwell, I checked the keys again and traced the number against my memory of the floor. I felt the weight of the ring in my pocket, then felt the weight of the residue still clinging to my thumb from the sealed door. Those two weights balanced the scale. Evidence tape on one side, a witness on the other. Between them hung a name printed in a directory and whispered in the dark. I crossed the lot under a sky that threatened rain and found the fence cut where I had come through earlier. The depot watched the road with blank windows. I set my pace to the rhythm of a freight line I could no longer hear and let my breathing slow. I walked the same corridor from before and counted doors until the numbers lined up with the tag on the ring. The key slid into brushed nickel and turned with a soft mechanical sigh, like a machine grateful to be assigned a purpose again. The lock yielded and the door moved a hair under my palm. The seam widened a fraction and exhaled the same stale air I had tasted earlier, layered now with a new thread of scent that raised the hair along my arms. On the back of the door, pressed under a bubble of old varnish, a sliver of blue fiber clung like a vein. It matched the thread I had lifted from the dock. I followed it with my eyes to the floor, then to the opposite wall where the maintenance closet waited with its squealing hinges and its stubborn metal plate. I eased the door open 1 inch more, and the beam of my light found a thin scrape across the concrete, curved and recent, as if something heavy had pivoted there in a hurry. Then I heard it, faint but distinct, a soft click from the other side of the closet wall, not the building settling, not a pipe complaining, but a mechanical tongue seeding into a strike, small and careful and alive. Estimated the sound I heard behind the closet wall did not repeat. Silence returned, but silence with memory. My thumb still rested on the key in the new lock. I left it there for one more second, then turned it back and removed it. Doors keep their secrets best when you let them. The maintenance closet across from me groaned when I tested the hinges. The squeal was sharp, too loud for stealth. I stopped, set my pack down and rubbed a smear of grease from a pipe onto the metal hinge. Opened it again. The squeal dropped to a whisper. I stepped inside. A bucket, a coil of hose, a stack of faded tags, exactly as the guard described. But the back wall carried the small metal plate he mentioned. I crouched and ran a hand along the edges. Not smooth. Scored faintly, the kind of marks left when someone has pried before. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing. But the surface radiated a different temperature than the wall around it. Cooler. Behind it, space waited. I left the closet for later. The priority was the office door with the new lock. I returned, slid the key in again and turned. This time I pushed fully. The hinges protested, but the door gave way. Inside smelled of old paper and faint copper. The office was larger than I expected, square, with filing cabinets against one wall and a desk positioned near the window. Dust lay heavy on the floor except for 2 lines that led from door to desk and desk to cabinet. Someone had been moving between them. Often. The desk drawers were closed. The top bore a thin film of dust except where a square had been wiped clean. I leaned close. The wiped area matched the size of a laptop. Not present now. Likely Samuel's. The strongbox sat under the desk, steel and locked, its chain still wrapped around one leg. I tugged it once, heavy, the kind of weight that carries paper instead of coins, paper that mattered. I crouched and examined the chain. Surface rust but fresh scratches where a key had turned not long ago. Whoever last opened it had relocked it after use. I would need leverage or time to break it, and I had neither in that moment. On the cabinet tops, a heap of shredded files lay balled like discarded nests. I spread a few across the desk. Most were beyond recognition, but one piece carried a faint logo, Harlan Freight and Mineral Storage. The name again. Patterns confirm themselves when they want to be seen. I sifted deeper and found more fragments. Numbers, shipping codes, partial dates. The slivers told of transactions far beyond the capacity of Rust Creek's yard. Freight moved through here, but not the kind meant for records. Samuel had been tracking it. He had taken the wrong step into the right room. Near the pile, a dark smudge caught the light. I touched it with a fingertip. Dry, flaked under pressure. Blood or something that had been blood. I followed the smear to the floor where it led under the desk. There, crumpled against the wall, lay a glove, black leather torn at the palm. The tear was stiff with dried stains. I turned it inside out. The lining carried more blood embedded into the fabric, not an accident, not work wear. A glove that had been close to violence. My brother's blood, maybe, or someone else's. Either way, it was evidence. I held the glove for a long second, the leather cold against my skin. A man wears gloves to hide fingerprints, not to leave them. Whoever used this pair had been careful, careful enough to leave nothing but blood. I placed it back exactly where I found it, position unchanged. Evidence loses meaning when moved without record. Then I returned to the strongbox. I tried the keys from the ring the guard gave me. None fit. I checked again. Still nothing. This lock belonged to someone higher in the chain. The strongbox would remain shut for now. But shut boxes still talk. I lifted one edge. The sound inside was not hollow. Weight shifted. Papers. Maybe discs. Maybe both. Samuel had locked it, or someone had locked it after him. Either way, the contents mattered enough to guard. I straightened and scanned the room again. Behind the desk near the wall, I noticed a faint outline. Rectangular. Like a cabinet once stood there but had been removed. Dust patterns betrayed absence. I crouched and swept my light across the baseboard. A small cluster of fibers clung there. Blue, synthetic, same as the thread from the dock. Whoever cleaned that space wore the same gloves. The trail was consistent now. Fibers at the dock, at the door, now here. Same operator, same method. Clean, conceal, move on. But the glove left behind told me the system was not perfect. Mistakes happen. Samuel had found those mistakes. So had I. I stood still in that room, breathing slow, letting the silence collect around me. My brother had been here. He had followed the same clues, looked at the same scraps. He had probably touched the same strongbox. I could almost see him at the desk, laying out fragments, building patterns, close to finishing. Close enough that someone stepped through the door behind him and ended the pattern in blood. The glove was proof of violence. The strongbox was proof of record. The shredded files were proof of concealment. 3 forms of proof in one room. That was not coincidence, that was process. I gathered my pack and reached for the doorknob to leave. My hand froze before touching it. On the underside of the knob, faint and oily, was a smear of the same copper scent as the glove. I lifted my finger and brought it to my nose. The tang was unmistakable. Whoever locked this door last did it with blood still on their hand. The corridor outside was silent, but silence no longer felt empty. It felt occupied. I eased the door shut behind me, pocketed the key, and followed the hall back toward the main depot. My steps echoed, then stuttered against another sound. A soft shuffle, not mine. Ahead near the service corridor, dust shifted in a line too even for wind. Someone else was here. The sound in the corridor never came again. A shuffle, then stillness. I stood there with my weight balanced, listening, but the depot gave me nothing more. Whoever had been moving was either gone or practiced enough to wait me out. That silence told its own story. Someone was guarding this place. Someone comfortable here. I left without rushing. A man in a hurry announces himself. I locked the office door behind me, wiped my prints, and retraced my route to the fence. The badge in my pocket felt heavier with every step. I crossed into the streetlight's reach and kept moving until I was back among people who had chosen not to see me. The witness had given me Harlan's name. The shredded papers confirmed it. Patterns form fast when you already know where to look, but names rarely come alone. Harlan's network stretched through contractors, drivers, enforcers, the kind of men who did the heavy lifting while their boss stood clean. If I wanted to close the distance, I needed one of those men to crack. Rust Creek had its places. Bars where cash moved faster than talk, motels where curtains never closed, diners where the wrong booth made you visible. I picked one and sat where I could watch reflections in the window glass. 2 hours passed. Then I saw him. A man I recognized from Samuel's notes, though the sketch in my brother's handwriting had been crude. Broad shoulders, heavy jaw, a limp in the left foot. The guard's memory of a crooked step. He called himself Marrow, a name chosen to sound harder than bone. He was Harlan's courier, maybe more. He had been seen at the depot after hours, and now he was here, nursing a drink and watching the door too often. I waited until he left, then followed at a distance, quiet as shadow. His limp slowed him enough that I never had to shorten my stride. He stopped at a service lot behind an old warehouse. I closed the distance and stepped into the light. He turned, shoulders wide, hand inside his jacket. I told him my name. I told him I was Samuel's brother. His hand froze, but his eyes narrowed, not in guilt, in calculation. He said he did not know Samuel. I said his footprints said otherwise. The air thickened between us. He drew out his hand, not with a weapon but with a small packet folded tight. He tossed it onto the ground between us. Inside were papers, printed schedules, delivery logs. They bore the stamp of Harlan's company. It looked like a gift, but gifts from men like him are never free. I pressed him for details. He gave me a story. Said Samuel had come to him asking about shipments through the yard. Said he told him to stop digging. Said Samuel had ignored the warning. He admitted being at the depot the night Samuel disappeared, but claimed he left before anything happened. Claimed Harlan's name was only a rumor, nothing he could prove. I checked the papers later under clean light. They were real, but too real. Neat, organized, almost curated. Logs that showed routine business, nothing illegal, not the kind of files someone hides in a warehouse. They were meant to mislead, a performance on paper. I tested his alibi against Samuel's receipt, against the guard's account. The times did not fit. His limp matched the witness's description, but his story bent too easily, like metal reheated and hammered thin. Still, doubt creeps in when the facts do not sit straight. What if Samuel had pushed the wrong man? What if Marrow had warned him off and someone else had silenced him? The strongbox still sat unopened in the depot. The glove still stained with blood. Neither pointed directly to Marrow. And yet his presence, his limp, his eagerness to hand me neat files, they made him a likely suspect. Too likely. I spent a night pressing the angles, tracing his movements, following receipts. Each lead circled back to nothing. No missing hours. No gaps he could not explain. The logs checked out with third parties. His trail was clean, too clean. Clean trails usually mean they were scrubbed by someone else. Frustration is a heavy weight. It clouds thought if you let it. I did not let it. I reminded myself of Samuel's patience, of the way he built cases out of fragments. My brother would not have settled for the easy suspect. Neither would I by morning. The false trail was clear. Marrow was a decoy. His limp, his files, his presence, all of it positioned where I would find it. A shape meant to draw heat away from someone higher. I had walked the line they laid out for me, and I had seen where it broke. I returned to the depot, retraced my steps past the dock, past the cabinet with the missing keys, past the corridor where silence had once shuffled. The locked office still held the strongbox. The shredded files still bore Harlan's name. Those were real, not curated. And I knew the next piece of truth would not come from Marrow or any man like him. It would come from the thing Samuel had left behind. The laptop. I pulled Samuel's badge from my pocket and set it on the desk under the fading light. It stared back at me, scratched and torn. Then I pocketed it again and left. 2 blocks from the depot, a voice called my name. A stranger on the curb, eyes restless, hand tucked in his jacket. He said he had something of mine. From Samuel. In his hand was a pawn ticket. and on the ticket was a description that matched my brother's laptop. The pawn shop sat 3 streets off the main square, tucked between a liquor store and a laundromat that had not turned a drum in years. The windows wore wire mesh. The glass behind it held layers of hand-painted signs offering quick cash, no questions. Inside, the air smelled of machine oil and stale smoke. I stepped through the door and the bell above it coughed instead of ringing. The man behind the counter did not look up from his magazine. He only asked what I wanted to sell. I slid the pawn ticket across the glass and waited. He read it, frowned, then disappeared into the back without another word. When he returned, he carried a plastic case wrapped in tape. He set it down like it had weight enough to matter, then tapped the ticket. No questions, no small talk, just the trade. I cut the tape with my knife. Inside lay Samuel's laptop. The edges were scratched, the casing dented, signs of struggle, but the power light still glowed faintly when I pressed it. Whoever pawned it had not known what it carried. Or maybe they did, and thought a pawn shop was the safest dead end. Either way, the machine was mine now. I did not power it on there, not under someone else's lights. I carried it out into the night and walked until I reached a diner that stayed open on caffeine and habit. The booth in the corner gave me a wall at my back and the window at my side. I ordered coffee I would not drink and set the laptop on the table. It asked for a password. Samuel had been careful, too careful to use his birthday or my name. I tried patterns from his notes, case numbers, file tags. Nothing. The machine locked after 3 attempts. I shut it down and thought the way he would. Samuel trusted systems more than people. He believed encryption was armor, but he also believed in leaving trails for the right eyes. I checked the underside. A small sticker clung there, half torn. Numbers faded but legible, not serial, coordinates. Rust Creek latitude. Below it, 4 digits, a combination. I powered the machine again, entered the digits. The lock broke. The desktop opened on a field of folders, each labeled in the same clean way Samuel always kept his files. Most were encrypted, symbols instead of words, but one folder stood open, labeled simply Trace. Inside were notes, shipment logs, names, dates, patterns I recognized from the shredded files in the depot. He had rebuilt them digitally, backups for when the paper trail went missing. Smart. Too smart for whoever tried to bury him. One entry carried the name Harlan spelled out in full. Next to it, amounts of currency, shipments moving through Rust Creek, dates that matched the guard's memory. Another folder held photographs, grainy, shot from distance but clear enough. Trucks with Harlan's logo parked where no trucks should have been. Men moving crates at night. The guard's words on paper now had images to lean on. Then came the folder Samuel had sealed with his name. Ward. I opened it. Inside was a running log, a kind of journal, each entry marked with time and place. The last entry stopped 2 nights before his silence began. Met with contact at yard. Confirmed counterfeit prints on site. 2 men present uncooperative. Believe Harlan running operation directly. Need to secure strongbox from office. If not back by midnight, assume compromised. I read it twice, then 3 times. The words hit like blows. Samuel had known he was close enough to leave a message for me. He knew midnight might never come. The files grew heavier the deeper I went. One folder contained scans of bills, counterfeit currency indistinguishable to the naked eye. Another showed financial ledgers tying false shipments to shell companies, and every trail circled back to Victor Harlan. His company, his warehouses, his name repeated like a hammer driving the nail. Encryption guarded the rest. I worked for hours, breaking small locks, skipping others. Each time I succeeded, more weight fell into place. Samuel had been days away from blowing the ring wide open. That was why he was gone. By dawn, I had enough. Enough to confront. Enough to make noise even if the system tried to quiet me. I copied the files to a drive and slid it into my pocket. The laptop itself I kept closed, chain of custody intact. When I left the diner, the streets of Rust Creek were still sleeping, but the sky was lighter, gray bleeding into pale, the kind of morning Samuel used to call clean. I walked past shuttered shops and thought of his handwriting in that final note. If not back by midnight, assume compromised. He had not been writing for himself. He had been writing for me. I tightened my grip on the drive in my pocket. The badge in my other pocket pressed against it, cold, plastic, and warm proof. Together, they told the same story. And that story pointed to one man, Victor Harlan. The drive in my pocket carried more weight than steel. It held Samuel's trail, his voice, his final entry. It held names, dates, and numbers sharp enough to cut through lies. By itself, it was evidence. Combined with what I had from the depot, it was a case. But cases collapse if the pieces do not fit together clean. My next step was to make them align. I found a room above the diner, cheap and unclaimed, the kind rented by men who wanted no paper trace. I set Samuel's laptop on the table and laid the glove beside it. The glove was stiff, the leather cracked, the stain deep. I stared at it, then at the badge. One carried his blood, the other his name. Between them, the strongbox still locked in the depot waited like a chest holding his voice. I needed them all to speak together. The decryption took hours. Samuel's system was layered with codes nested like Russian dolls. He trusted no one, not me, not even himself. But he trusted the patterns. Dates of cases he worked, initials of clients he once protected, fragments of statutes he lived by. I followed the trail the way he meant it to be followed, patient, relentless, one lock at a time. What opened confirmed what the guard had said, what the scraps of paper had hinted. Contracts signed under shell names, transport schedules masked as mineral shipments, routes that passed directly through Rust Creek, and always the same end point, warehouses bearing Victor Harlan's signature. His business empire was not a front, it was the whole machine, and Samuel had traced it until they traced him. I laid the files side by side, the photographs of trucks, the shredded paper fragment with Harlan's logo, the directory the guard had kept in his wallet, the pawn ticket that put the laptop in my hands. Each piece separate meant suspicion. Together they meant proof. I could feel Samuel's method in it, build the case brick by brick until no one could deny the wall, but walls mean nothing unless someone sees them. Rust Creek's officials had looked away already. The evidence tape on the depot doors told me that. Someone higher had ordered silence. The system was not built to protect men like Samuel. It was built to absorb their absence. That left me. I spent the day mapping my approach. Harlan's office sat above the freight company he used as his shield. Glass walls, polished desks, the kind of place designed to project strength. I knew his type. Men like him lived on perception. Take away the appearance of control and the rest crumbles. I slipped the glove into a bag marked for evidence. I sealed the drive with tape. I cleaned my boots, changed my shirt, and left the drifter behind for a man who could walk into an office and look unshaken. The uniform may have gone years ago, but discipline never leaves. At dusk, I returned to the depot one last time. The strongbox still sat under the desk, chained, waiting. I forced the lock with the bar, slow and deliberate. Inside were papers wrapped in twine, bank ledgers, receipts, notes in Samuel's hand, his voice on every page. One sheet carried a copy of the same log I had read on his laptop, but longer. Meeting confirmed with Harlan's men. Counterfeit bills moving through yard in steel crates. Evidence secured. If this is found, pursue Harlan directly. Trust nothing else. I slid the papers into my bag and locked the strongbox again. The chain clinked like a bell, a final note of closure. Samuel had left a map. I had followed it. And now the path ended with the man who thought silence was stronger than blood. By nightfall, the city lights painted Harlan's tower in pale gold. His name stood in steel letters above the glass doors. The building hummed with quiet wealth, the kind that believes itself untouchable. I stood across the street and watched the reflections ripple. My brother had stood against this man with only a badge and belief. I stood with blood, memory, and proof. I crossed at the light, the drive in my pocket, the glove in my bag, the papers pressed flat. Each step carried Samuel with me. The glass doors parted. The lobby swallowed me whole. Tomorrow belonged to Harlan, tonight belonged to me. The lobby smelled of polish and cold air, the kind piped through ducts to keep men awake and alert. The guard at the desk looked up when I entered but said nothing. He knew the type I was, ex-military, broad enough, worn enough. Not the kind you delay with small questions. I passed without slowing, boots clicking against stone, eyes fixed on the elevator. The ride up was silent except for the hum of machinery beneath my feet. My reflection stared back at me in the brushed metal walls, tired eyes, jaw set. I carried no weapon but the evidence. That was sharper than steel if wielded right. Samuel believed in that. This time I would too. The doors opened to glass and gold. Victor Harlan's office stretched across the top floor, wide windows overlooking a city that pretended it did not know his name. He sat behind a desk large enough to build distance. He looked up when I entered, expression cool, practiced. A man who thought he controlled the script. I set the drive on his desk. Next to it, the bloodied glove in its bag. Then the pages from the strongbox, Samuel's handwriting clear, steady, alive. Piece by piece, I built the wall Samuel had died constructing. Harlan's hands never left the desk, but his eyes flickered once fast when they landed on the note that bore my brother's name. I spoke steady. I told him what I had, the roots, the contracts, the counterfeit bills traced through his warehouses, the witness who had seen Samuel enter the depot with his men, the fibers, the glove, the laptop, the ledger. Brick by brick, I stacked the evidence higher until the wall shadowed over him. He tried denial first, said the papers were forged, the files fabricated, the witness unreliable. His voice was smooth, the voice of a man used to slippery ground. I let him speak. Then I slid the final page across the desk, Samuel's last entry. If not back by midnight, assume compromised. Pursue Harlan directly, trust nothing else. Silence hung between us, not the empty kind, the heavy kind, the kind that speaks louder than words. Harlan's face broke then, not much. Just a crack in the calm, a shift in his jaw, the first sign that the truth had landed. The doors opened behind me. Not guards. Authorities. The files I had copied had already gone out, delivered through channels Samuel trusted before he died. I had followed his map, but he had left roads of his own. Men in suits entered, eyes sharp, hands steady. They did not look at me. They looked at Harlan, and they moved to take him. He did not fight. Men like him rarely do once the curtain falls. He let them lead him out, his empire crumbling in silence, the weight of proof dragging behind him. When the room emptied, I stood alone with Samuel's note in my hand. His words stared back at me, final, permanent. He had trusted that someone would follow if he could not finish. That someone had been me. I left the office without looking back. The city outside had changed nothing. Traffic moved, lights blinked, people hurried home. But for me, the silence had shifted. The badge in my pocket was no longer just a reminder of loss. It was a marker of justice. They buried my brother in silence. But silence never lasts. Truth speaks if you are willing to dig deep enough. And Samuel's truth had spoken.
What are your thoughts on this case? Let us know in the comments. Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily crime cases we uncover. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Click here to watch the next video as we uncover another thrilling crime case.